Hey, welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Jordan Ramirez. You know how I love to talk about movies in my movie reviews? But sometimes, whenever we watch a movie, sometimes there is always going to be somebody right next to you or an on screen character who is going to tell you the cliches that are coming up in the story that I either find annoying or just plain lazy. Some of my personal gripes when watching the films of today that I could live without are the main hero is a nerd and he's being bullied only to become the main hero who would save the day, or the reliance of technology to solve everyday problems that can make the world a better place. Or there's another cliche that I can do without, which is the pandering of token characters who are only added to the movie just to appease their fan base. These could either include gay characters, black, Asian, Latinx, indigenous characters, or disabled characters. Another unnecessary cliche that I can go without that I find a pain to me is the awkward or unfunny dialogue in some of today's family movies or comedies where they really try too hard to be funny, but they don't. Well, those are just some of my least favorite cliches that I can live without in today's movies. Which brings me to something that I read from The Guardian. So this article is not even an article. It is instead a collection of movie cliches that have been put together by some of their movie critics that one can live without in today's films. The first cliche comes from film critic Peter Bradshaw for The Guardian. His topic focuses on the vanishing smoking habit. A character is introduced in the very first scene as a smoker, often doing loads of smoking business, invariably to indicate that their short lives are out of control and they are a bit of a screw-up. First thing in the morning, and they're blearily scrabbling around for cigarettes, lighting it with a shaky hand, often over a brimming ashtray in a scuzzy apartment with the blinds drawn. This is clearly someone with a serious 3-pack-a-day habit. Then something dramatic happens. The plot kicks into gear, things get stressful, and they never touch a cigarette for the rest of the film. Second cliche comes from film producer Catherine Bray, originally a film critic. Her thesis is selfie shorthand. Virtually everyone takes selfies now. Your grandma, your 11-year-old niece, your suburban dad who just got a jazzy new sweater vest. In the movies, though, the act of self-portraiture is lazy shorthand for vacuous, possibly Californian, young men and women, very likely to be dispatched sooner or later by a masked man with a machete. And the implied logic goes, they deserve it too, because they took a picture of themselves with their phone. Third cliche comes from film critic Simran Hans, formerly of The Observer. Her thesis is entitled Pavement Catharsis. Why is it that spiritually anguished millennials in film so often take to the street for a moment of self-delusion? Is it to put their problems in perspective, or simply main character syndrome? I blame the canonical elder millennial text Frances Ha, whose best remembered scene sees Greta Gerwig's financially precarious aspiring modern dancer joyfully pirouetting along a Manhattan sidewalk to David Bowie's Modern Love, itself a homage to Leo Carax's Paris cette mauvaise song. Fourth cliche comes from film critic Casper Salmon. His thesis is entitled Droning On. The drone shot, used mostly for meaningless interstitial scenes and calling attention to their drabness in all the worst ways, has become one of the worst cliches of modern cinema. Here is an overhead of a car driving down a very straight road. Here's a forest, filmed from above. Cinema's pioneers swooped and whooshed all over the place with cameras the weight of a car, but in the age of content we have the ability to slowly rise at a steady line for 2 minutes. Progress! Fifth cliche comes from film critic Rebecca Liu. Her thesis is called The Nerd Supremacy. In the early 2000s, the nerd was a pitiable figure, often cast as the foil to the sporty lead. But by the 2010s, perhaps due to the ascendancy of Silicon Valley and Barack Obama's charismatic technocracy replacing the human beings and fish can coexist dufferism of George W. Bush, the nerds were in the lead. They were billionaire playboys, Marvel's Tony Stark, dangerous wunderkinds, The Social Network, high-concept science men, many a Christopher Nolan film. They were often seen writing inscrutable equations on boards and tangled with women who were beautiful and intelligent, but not as intelligent, and offending nearly everyone in their wake, but it didn't matter because they had vision. We now live in a time dominated by this archetype, and it is not very fun. The cool smart guy film is often quick to indulge the self-mythology of its protagonist. It is so lonely being a genius, but portents can be seen. Or, as Rooney Mara playing a Harvard graduate says to Jesse Eisenberg's Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network, You're going to go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd, and I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that won't be true. It will be because you're an asshole. The sixth cliche comes from film critic Benjamin Lee called Never Happily Ever After. Anyone who has ever swiped right on a dating app can attest to the gnarly horrors that can sometimes follow. But too many screenwriters have found themselves unable to see past the grim to focus on the good. When Tinder, or more often some cheap we can't get the rights imitation called Date Match or Flirter is used on screen, it's a cruel way to poke fun at those on it. A parade of ghoulish cartoons existing only to push our lead back into the real world, where people are, of course, historically totally normal. Whether it's a catfishing liar or a sex-obsessed bro, we're only seeing worst-case scenarios dialed up past 11. With 2 in every 5 couples now meeting digitally, it's a strangely dated and annoyingly alarmist trope, seemingly created by someone who has been married since a time before smartphones smugly judging up from up high. The 7th cliche from film critic Ann Bilson is entitled The Surprise Car Crash. Beware any scene set inside a car where nothing much seems to be happening, especially if the driver keeps talking their eyes off the road to talk to a passenger, check on their kids, fiddle with the radio, or get upset during a phone call, which they shouldn't be making anyway if they're behind the wheel. This is often a prelude to a surprise car crash in which another vehicle pops up out of nowhere. Adaptation, Whiplash, No Country for Old Men, The Age of Adeline, 10 Cloverfield Lane, and The Mother are just a few examples. The 8th cliche from film critic Andrew Pulver is entitled Raised Elevation. You're a superhero. You have an awesome responsibility to yourself and society, and you can't tell anyone. It's lonely, you're misunderstood, and the press is breathing down your neck. What do you do to relieve yourself of this crushing burden? Why, you locate the tallest building in the city, find a prominent ledge on or near its roof, and gaze moodily, with a god's eye view of the teeming anthill of humanity that you must defend. For you are Spider-Man, or possibly Batman, or maybe Gwen Stacy in Across the Spider-Verse. We get it. It's tough being a superhero, but no one's forcing you to do it. And you're not real anyway. So enough with the histrionics for all our sakes. The 9th cliche comes from film critic Adrienne Horton in her thesis entitled Quirky Text Messages. Once, many years ago, it was inventive to work text messaging into films and TV. The prep schoolers of Gossip Girl or the teens of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World tapping away on their phones. So with the times. But since then, the art of on-screen texting has remained mostly frozen in a dated, uncanny valley of colored bubbles added in post-production. To be fair, digital messaging, inert and silent, is pretty uncinematic. The formal convention of text on screen, the little blur boxes that appear next to a character, made sense. It was efficient, affordable, and allowed the focus to stay on an actor's face. The 10th cliche comes from film critic Phil Hode, entitled Moronic Influencers. It has become undeniably harder for cinema to designate entire groups of people as villainous or entirely lacking in redeeming qualities. So the advent of the social media influencer, currently easy shorthand for stupid, self-obsessed, venal, fake, and quite possibly criminal, has been a plus for everyone who likes a cinematic whipping boy or girl. See Glass Onion, A Knives Out Mystery, Sweat, Influencer, and Not Okay. And last but not least, film critic Terry White wraps it up with X in the City. You know that thing when you live in a densely populated city and still run into your narratively most significant X at the exact right for the plot moment? Me neither. I'd sometimes fantasize, usually hair-related, about running into an ex during my 2 decades in London, population 9 million. And did I? Not once. But Carrie did in Sex and the City 2, running into Aiden, who dribbled. This is the best mirage that I've ever had. In Abu Dhabi, population 1.5 million. Just when her marriage to Big hit a bump. This isn't a new cliche, of course, but you'd think a time of permanent online surveillance, it would be easy to avoid someone you actively never want to see again. See, I prefer a film that deals with the reality, the committed effort to find an X. The Godfather, Brokeback Mountain, or Kill Bill. Now that's love. So, without further ado, today's film review is Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, followed by my segment Allow Me to Explain. And now, as they say, on with the show. This is Jordan Ramirez, and you are listening to Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. And now, here is my latest film review. My film review for this episode is Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, released in 2022, directed by Dean Fleischer Camp, starring Jenny Slate, Dean Fleischer Camp, and Isabella Rossellini. The synopsis of the film largely centers around a talking shell named Marcel, played by Jenny Slate. He is the subject of a new documentary by filmmaker Dean Fleischer Camp. Marcel lives alone with his grandmother Nana Connie, played by Isabella Rossellini, in the house as Dean is filming their everyday lives. Soon it later evolves into Marcel's journey of finding his family and the entire Shell community, who were taken away by the previous owners of the house. With the help of Dean, Marcel is now taking the chance of finding his own family. I think of this film as one of the truly great and imaginative improvisational documentaries that I have ever watched. The focus of the movie on a talking shell and his grandmother and the entire Shell community that was taken away while talking to the filmmaker is something that I always dreamed of wanting to see. I like the interaction between the subject and the director of the film as if it is real life. It feels surreal to have the subject asking the director to have his face and likeness being shown in this documentary, even though Marcel is the true star of his own story. It feels natural, but it is also a fun tribute to documentaries that has never been at this level of riffing. I found this movie refreshing to actually see stop motion animation finally being put to good use, not just for Marcel, but also his aunt, the insects, the Shell community, etc. I just felt like I had a lot of fun watching these characters that feel like inanimate objects that have a life completely of their own, as if they are real people. I applaud the Kyoto Brothers production company for helping to assist this picture, as well as the dozens, if not brilliant animators on this film who were able to bring Marcel's world to the big screen, even with some digital effects that were only used sparingly. I enjoyed the acting by the actors Jenny Slate and Isabella Rossellini. Their scenes together feel so natural and heartwarming that I can easily relate to. It's not forced or playing for an award show or anything like that. It is instead helping us as the audience to understand that even though Marcel wants to be with his grandmother and protect her, the Nana Connie wants Marcel to take the journey and tell his own story. A great example of this is when the crew for 60 Minutes shows up at the front door, and even though Marcel is worried about his grandmother, Nana Connie tells Marcel to do the interview and not worry about her. It's a powerful and beautiful scene that I feel so moved by in terms of not just the acting, but the emotions going through the characters in that one scene alone. Marcel the Shell began as a YouTube short in 2010 with Jenny Slate as the voice of the titular character and directed by Dean Fleischer Camp. The video garnered more than 30 million hits that was enough to spawn 2 more videos in 2011 and 2014, and even 2 children's books from 2011 and 2014 as well. Between the shorts and the feature film, Dean Fleischer Camp became increasingly interested by using filmmaking to explore how everyday users consume media. That result was a short feature from 2016, Fraud. The short was a breakthrough in the burgeoning subgenre of recycling material found online such as YouTube and Facebook. The short feature was a critique of contemporary media manipulation found on social media. Dean Fleischer Camp in an interview with Cineast described the short feature this way. Fraud mimics a documentary aesthetic to point out how malleable film footage is and how easy it is to manipulate our perception of what truth looks like. He also said, with Fraud, I wanted to make a documentary that could prove to people that media manipulation can be even more dangerous than we imagine. Dean met Jenny Slate, the voice of the titular character, when he was out of college at his first job, Plum TV. The station produced original programming for resort locations in Nantucket and Vail, Colorado. For some reason, they thought the way to build an audience would be hiring Jenny and me and a few other people to create comedic content, sketch shows, and so on. We started working together, then started dating and got married. Then we ended our marriage, but we've continued to work together. Both Dean and Jenny were passionate about films when they noticed that the 3 shorts were successful. They had meetings with various studios and networks in expanding the Marcel shorts into a feature. They were more interested in using the character for an adventure action type film. However, the ideas that Dean and Jenny had in mind did not sync with the major studios in Hollywood, so they ended up saying no to their offers and ideas. Within the next 3 to 4 years, they said no to easy money and took the independent route in order to have the complete control of their own characters. Around 2015, Dean and Jenny decided to talk to the producer, Elizabeth Holm, about taking the character in the feature film route. Holm previously produced Jenny Slate's previous projects, Obvious Child and Landline. Both Dean and Jenny knew that it was going to be a challenge to take a character from the YouTube shorts and expand his story that wouldn't be stretched too thin to satisfy the streaming media market. For the process of turning Marcel into a feature film, he said, "I was committed to the idea of making what we were doing as much like a documentary process as we could, while not ignoring the larger storytelling demands and the orchestration that a feature requires. We knew it couldn't just be jokes the way the early videos were. My task as director was to try to keep that in mind at every turn." Dean worked with Nick Paley to work on writing the screenplay for several months and then record with Jenny Slate for a day or two. They would shoot the scenes that were written in the script and improvise around what was in the script. As Dean explains it, so it was a narrative writing period, a couple days of recording, another writing period, another couple days recording, probably half a dozen times until we'd create the whole story. After saying no to the studios and making the project themselves, they ended up looking for who would finance the film. They encountered the same problems as before, people wanting to have creative control of the project as well as merchandising rights, and that they had little trust in Dean as a filmmaker or seeing both Dean and Jenny as creative geniuses. So they waited until they ended up with a partner at Cinereach, a non-profit financing company who not only financed the film, but who were also known for having much experience in producing independent films and supporting artists. One thing that made the story feel so integral was its stop-motion animation. Since the character originated as a stop-motion character, they remained committed to make the project entirely with stop-motion animation to make the character feel human and vulnerable. Dean Fleischer Camp. A lot of the stop-motion pros are getting up in years, and a lot of the people who know how to digitally integrate things seamlessly are very young. So it was a real meeting of minds. They shot the live action scenes first and cut the film together. For the animation filming, they mimicked the lighting to integrate with the live action scenes that was shot on location. Stop motion cinematographer Eric Atkins was on the set every day taking meticulous notes and thinking about the mathematics of where the character would be standing and where the lighting should go, such as shadows for the character. Dean Fleischer Camp. When Marcel is on the car ride and we drive past the tree, there's a shadow cast on the dashboard from the tree. For every one of those shadows, Eric and his team determined the exact time code for when that tree passes and rigged up a flag on the animation stage to pass by at the exact moment the car passes by the tree. That kind of thing is done throughout the film. For the casting of Nana Connie, Dean Fleischer Camp and Jenny Slate were drawn to Isabella Rossellini. She said yes to this project since she is an artist like them as well. Rossellini wrote, directed, and starred in her one-woman shows. She appeared in the Sundance series Green Porno from 2008 to 2013, which she wrote as well. Dean Fleischer Camp ended up persuading Isabella to do the project, and she did want to do it. Rossellini had never worked on a project in which she would improvise her own dialogue. She had previously done voiceover work before, but this was her first in which she recorded her own lines on location. Some of her lines about Nana Connie's farming were recorded in her actual farm in New York State. One of the other integrating elements of this story was Marcel meeting with his icon, Leslie Stahl from 60 Minutes, Dean Fleischer Camp. My integrating Leslie Stahl into the film came from needs within the story itself. In our minds, it was always Leslie Stahl, and it was always 60 Minutes, and we got incredibly lucky. We were able to get the project in front of her and her team, and they were willing to collaborate, to treat us the way that I always treat Marcel. They took us completely seriously. The film first premiered at the Telluride Film Festival on September 3rd, 2021. In November of that year, A24 acquired the rights to the film, with Universal coming on board for international markets. A24, which was not known for distributing animated films, was better known for distributing art house films from Ex Machina from 2014, Moonlight from 2016, Lady Bird 2017, The Whale 2022, and Everything Everywhere All at Once 2022. However, Fleischer Camp saw the company as the right choice for this film. I always felt it would have to be a distributor that saw the film for what it is and not as a potential Minions or whatever mostly kid-centric film they produced last. We went with the distributor that had the most agility and got the film for what it was. The film was given a limited release in select theaters across the United States on June 24, 2022. It was later released nationwide on July 15th. Marcel was met with positive praise from critics and received numerous accolades. The National Board of Review for Best Animated Feature Film, the Annie Awards for Best Independent Animated Feature, Best Voice Acting in an Animated Feature Production, and Best Writing in an Animated Feature Production, and nominated for Best Animated Feature Film at the 95th Annual Academy Awards earlier this year. I will say that this film is one of my absolute favorites from last year that I got to enjoy. It feels completely natural in terms of its acting, dialogue, and the stop motion animation and cinematography that makes this one of the best animated films from this decade. It is truly one of the best films from the collaborative team of Dean Fleischerkamp and Jenny Slate. I just hope that there are more films like this in the future that may take an absurd premise and expand on it just for fun and also to get to know the characters more. We will be right back with my segment, Allow Me to Explain. Since the Florida legislative session does not begin until early next year, state Republicans are planning on rolling back child labor protections, which would exploit child labor in the state for 16 and 17-year-olds. So, how did we get here, and what are the consequences of this unfair and unethical practice? It's time for Allow Me to Explain. Florida House Republican Linda Cheney introduced legislation nearly 2 months ago that would undo decades of child labor regulations to loosen restrictions for 16 and 17-year-olds working. The legislation would prevent local governments from passing limitations stricter than the states. This legislation is part of a growing movement within the country to roll back child labor protections that was established to protect the health and safety of children. So how did this all begin? Who was behind it, and what can we do about it? Well, first let's look at the background of what led up to this. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, Florida has seen child labor violations tripled in 2019 to 281 in 2022. There are a number of factors that have led to the rise of this, including labor shortages from the pandemic, influx of unaccompanied minors coming to the United States seeking work, and high inflation leading more teens to enter the labor market to support their families, according to the Washington Post. A number of minors working in violation of child labor law rose to 88% since 2019, according to the U.S. Department of Labor. An investigation from the New York Times found that a widespread problem of immigrant children as young as 12 years old were illegally being employed and exploited in various states. Just in 2023 alone, a number of businesses across the state of Florida have been issued over $100,000 in fines related to child labor law violations. There was a recent news article from Orlando Weekly about a conservative think tank that has lobbied Republican lawmakers, including Linda Cheney, to relax child labor laws in the state. That think tank is the Foundation for Government Accountability, who drafted similar legislations to roll back child labor laws in other states. The person behind this think tank is far-right billionaire Dick Uihlein, who is a major donor to Governor DeSantis. The independent news site More Perfect Union obtained public records including emails and text messages between FGA and Representative Cheney. One email, for example, from the FGA to the aide of Representative Cheney read, "Attached is draft language on the youth worker freedom issue that Representative Cheney expressed interest into FGA." The records also revealed that not only was the FGA a fan of this piece of legislation, but that it was written entirely verbatim from them. The private think tank group also gave Representative Cheney talking points to counter the backlash of this legislation. The FGA has a lobbying arm, the Opportunity Solutions Project, to lobby Republicans in other states like Arkansas, Missouri, and Iowa to relax regulations on child labor law by framing these bills as the solution for businesses to address labor shortages. Legislative proposals that were introduced in the past 2 years in 16 states, including Florida, were intended to roll back child labor regulations while other states take aim at limitations on how late teens can work on school nights, extend working hours, lift age requirements for serving alcohol, etc. One example of an extreme proposal was a new bill signed into law this year in the state of Iowa, which allows employers to put minors to work in hazardous jobs and allows minors to operate heavy machinery like power saws. The Biden administration is currently working right now to crack down on child labor violations. Advocates, however, are worried that these changes to child labor laws across the United States are part of a long-term goal project to weaken regulations under the Fair Labor Standards Act that is meant to protect minors from dangerous work and exploitation. Some of these state laws have been backed by groups such as the Chamber of Commerce and the National Restaurant Association, a trade group representing low-wage industry giants like Burger King and McDonald's. Child experts note that having minors work for more than 20 hours a week can negatively affect things like academic performance and increase the risk for behavioral problems such as drug use or skipping school. After the bill was filed and announced, the bill, HB 49, ended up getting pushback from the media and from constituents. One of the critics coming against this bill is Dr. Chelsea Rivera of Central Florida Jobs with Justice, who said that she has concerns about the legislation because of safety and welfare. Dr. Rivera told Florida Phoenix, "There's been a lot of attention right now on protecting the education of our students and the sanctity of our education. But if students are working longer hours, that's an immediate danger to their education. I'm also really concerned about our immigrant and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color children who are already at increased risk of injuries in the workforce." So what can we do about this situation? Well, the first thing to do is to educate your friends or family members about this issue and why you deeply care about it. Do your research and discuss the issue, whether it's on social media as a post or as a video, to explain about the current situation regarding the exploitation of child labor violations. You can also donate to nonprofit organizations that are fighting this issue in the United States. A few examples are freedomunited.org or floridapolicy.org. This is not an easy issue that can be easily resolved, but it will take time and like-minded individuals to bring awareness to this issue. This has been Allow Me to Explain. So I will be taking a break from my mini-sode, but I will be back with a regular episode next Friday at 4 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Radio Public. You have been listening to Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. This series is now available to listen to at 4 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Radio Public every Friday. And my mini-sodes, Jordan Ramirez recommends every Monday at 12 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Radio Public. And just as a reminder to make sure to like and subscribe to my podcast on Spotify. Make sure to go to my blog website at Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez podcast.wordpress.com with my latest podcast episode on the page labeled Episodes. You can contact me on my social media feeds such as LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. I am also available on Letterboxd. Check out my YouTube channel as well, Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, and make sure to like and subscribe. If there is a film that you recommend that I would put for my next review, make sure to submit it to my social media accounts, and if you're lucky, make sure that you also recommend your favorite film and also put out your audition video on Instagram or on YouTube to make sure that you appear as a guest star on my next episode on a video podcast, special video podcast anyway, a special video podcast episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. And until then, I'll see you at the movies.